Welcome to the October edition of the Annielytics Hangout. The way this works is you can submit questions to me ahead of time and I will answer them, but you're not limited to just submitting the questions ahead of time. I can also take questions live. It's just helpful if the problem is a little more complicated, needs further explanation, just to be able to submit that ahead of time so I can do research and possibly follow up. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in. The first thing I'm going to do is show my screen, and I had my video off, but it's on now. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see the video while I'm showing my screen. But as we jump in, I may turn the video off because that can cause some glitches. So jumping right into the first question, someone asked, is it a hopeless battle to use URL shorteners tagged separately with campaign, source, medium for, say, a press release and a postcard and for social media, and expect employees to use the right one? Inevitably, the media department grabs the URL from a postcard or Facebook instead of the one I sent them, and then all the reporting is messed up. So this is a really common issue with campaign tagging. If you're not familiar with campaign tagging, if you just search for campaign tagging, my site usually comes up number one. It even outranks Google. Never thought that would be possible, but it's a really comprehensive guide that I wrote to campaign tagging. And I can say without hyperbole that the two most important things to understand in Google Analytics, hands down, are campaign tagging and working with custom channels. And I also wrote a companion guide on channel groupings so to explain how to use those, because they're really intended to be used in concert. You really shouldn't do one without the other and vice versa. So just to explain a little bit about the default channels, that is the dimension that drives the ever awesome channels report, which is my favorite channel in Google Analytics. Talk about it all the time. By the way, I did a video on how useless the social reports are in Google Analytics. If you haven't checked that out, I can save you the spoiler. All of these reports under social are, for one reason or another, rendered useless, mostly because of the lack of any kind of conversion tracking associated with them. And then there's a conversions report, but for some bizarre reason, Google is using, without any disclosure, is using multi-channel funnels data. And I figured that out when I went in, and I couldn't figure out why the revenue numbers and goal numbers in this report didn't match up with what I saw in the channels report, which we'll get back to in a minute. And the reason for that, and this was the telltale sign that this is using multi-channel funnels, this assisted versus last interaction analysis. Normally, there are no multi-channel funnels reports above this section here, multi-channel funnels. So it's very, very bizarre that Google just throws that in there. You also can't control the look back window, which defaults to 30 days, and you should push that back to 90 days. You don't have that ability here. So I would avoid the social reports. And if you want any kind of social reporting, hands down, in my opinion, the best social report in Google Analytics is if you go to the channels report and drill down to social. It's just one of the many, many, many reasons I love the channels report. So if you drill down to social, you're actually going to get to the social network dimension, which is fantastic because it rolls up all of the individual sources for each of the social networks into the network itself. So Facebook can be divided into facebook.com, m.facebook.com, l.facebook.com, lm.facebook.com. Oh, and there's even another one. I forget what it is right now. It shows up, I think it's like partner.facebook.com for some sites. Anyway, so this just rolls it all up, including links that you tag on your social networks. So super, super, super awesome. But this channels report is driven by this dimension called the default channel grouping. Super, super geeky name, unnecessarily geeky, could have just been called channels. But someone wasn't hugged enough as a child. But the standard channels are inadequate, in my opinion. And there's at least one standard channel that's completely missing. Actually, I would go so far as to say two. There is no standard channel for paid social. In fact, in one of Google's documents, I saw a recommendation to use the medium CPC. Do not ever, ever, ever use the medium CPC for paid social, because then that traffic will be routed into your paid search channel, and paid social is not the same as paid search. Paid search is Google ads, Bing ads, not Facebook promoted posts, Instagram promoted stories, and the like. So also, I really think that there should be a retargeting channel. You can use the display channel and then differentiate retargeting in other ways, like using the content parameter. But I really personally think that retargeting should be separated out and should be its own channel. So any channels like that. I also have some custom channels that I use. I have a Google Docs channel, a templates channel. Google did add an affiliate channel. I actually killed my affiliate because it was mostly spam and dubious practices. However, if you have affiliates, if you tag your medium affiliate, now don't use the plural, it can only be singular, Google will actually route that to your affiliate channel. So all that to say, this is a very, very, very important report, and it's made that much better by using custom channels, which goes back to, for the most part, campaign tagging. It's all kind of tied together. So getting back to the question, so that's the reason why campaign tagging is so important, but it is a very common issue for sites to not be consistent with their campaign tagging. One of the reasons for this is a lot of sites use Google's URL builder. The problem with this is that it's a great tool, and they actually did clean up their recommendations. Their recommendations used to be off. I still don't recommend using underscore. That's very 90s. I'd use a plus sign. If you tag using a plus sign, then it's going to translate into a space inside your Google Analytics reports. But at least they don't have the bad mediums that they used to have. So you can drop a URL here, tag your source. Your source is just going to be where the link lives. So if you're posting to Facebook, you want facebook.com. If it's Twitter, put twitter.com, etc., etc. The medium is the most important parameter to get right if you get nothing else right. So if it's going out in email, it has to be tagged email, and you need to use a lowercase e. If it's going out on social, it needs to be tagged social, etc., etc. The problem with this tool, though, is that it's one and you're done. So you have to keep coming back here to re-tag. So to help with this issue, I actually created a Google Doc. It's a campaign tagging tool, and anyone can use it. Just request a copy. And I have instructions for each of the columns. I have all kinds of resources in here. Unfortunately, these in my document are actually comments. For some reason, if you share a Google spreadsheet, comments don't get shared. So what I recommend doing is just cutting this after you open it. I press Command Option M to insert a comment. And then you can paste them in, and it would get rid of them up here, and then you can delete it. just so that you have access to them, I put them up here. So I give you lots of recommendations here. I also give you some tips in here, like recommended mediums, and also recommend that you use drop-down menus. If you find that your social media person or your email manager is going rogue and using all kinds of different tags, especially for Medium, you can restrict their options so that they have to choose from a drop-down. And then I also share an example campaign just to kind of give you ideas of how you can use campaign tagging. So I am going to go ahead and share this link in the chat where you can grab it. So moving on from that, but the nice thing here is that you can then, you can reuse the links. Like the link is generated here in the destination, in the tagging tool. The links are created here in this destination URL. Oops. But then if you look up here, you'll see that this is a formula. It's not actually the link. So in order to get the raw link, you would need to copy it. So Command or Control C, go in here, right click, choose Paste Special, Paste Values Only. And now watch, when I select this, this is now actually the link, and this is something that you can pass on to your developer. The link will be automatically generated, and I also force everything to lowercase. If you don't want your links forced to lowercase, then you can go in here and remove the lowercase function. I don't recommend doing that because one, the medium absolutely has to be lowercase, but also if you use a variety of cases, then each case is going to end up a separate line item in Google Analytics, which is suboptimal. You really don't want that. Okay, so yeah, enough said about that. You could do something like that or create something for yourself. But also training goes a long, long, long way. Just helping people to understand what these campaign tags do and how they help you in reporting. Because the main department that I see, the main two departments that I see get significantly less credit than they should are social and email. And a lot of this comes back to campaign tagging. But I see this even with really like top publishers like, well, what used to be Gawker, Jezebel, BuzzFeed. I mean, a lot of these really big sites, even sites like Southwest.com, they're just not understanding campaign tagging. And so I can tell, looking at their campaign parameters and reverse engineering them, that the majority of their social traffic in particular is showing up in the dreaded other bucket in channels. If you have any traffic in your other medium, you definitely want to address that. The way to see that is to go in here to your channels report, click on other, and then change the medium, change the primary dimension to medium. And these are the mediums that Google says, I have no idea what these are. Now, I have them, I obviously hawk over my campaign tags, but what I can't control is other people tagging links to my site. You can either create custom channels for these if you get a lot of these, or just let them go to your other bucket. But I frequently see in analytics audits that I do, the other channel being a really significant source of traffic. And that is traffic and conversions that someone is not getting credit for because nobody cares about the other bucket. It's the quintessential redheaded stepchild of Google Analytics. Okay, the second question, if you set up or take over a new analytics account, how many views do you typically set up? I typically set up 2. I set up a raw data view, and then I set up the view that they use for most of their data. So a couple things I'll say about that. Typically, when I do an analytics audit, the site won't have a raw data view. And the way that Google recommends creating a new view is to go in here under View and create new view. I actually don't recommend this approach. The reason for that is that if you create a new view, you have to create all new everything. You have to set up your e-commerce. You have to adjust all of your settings. You have to reset up all of your goals, et cetera, et cetera. Either share everything or start from scratch and set it all up. So typically the raw data view, which you're mostly using if something goes wrong with your analytics, but it's really limited in its usefulness if you don't have like e-commerce enabled, you don't have goals set up, you don't have a lot of the important settings that you need to have, because the purpose of this is really just to have it be unfiltered. So what I do is I go into my main view and I create a copy of this view. And then from there, then I just go in and remove all of the filters. So if you go in here, this is my main view, you could click copy view and then just rename it raw data, and then go into your filters and remove your filters. So I'm personally not a huge fan of having lots and lots of views. I audit quite a few Google Analytics sites or Google Analytics accounts, I should say, that have multiple views. The biggest problem that you run into, and I wrote a post on this, where I talk about to think of your visitor as a puppy and the session as a box. And your goal is to keep the puppy inside the box. So actually the view is the box and your visitor is the puppy. And you want to keep the visitor inside that view throughout the entire session. I'll go ahead and... So you want to make sure that that puppy stays inside the view throughout the entire session. So one of the things that I see, which I think is a mistake, is a lot of times, especially if a site is broken up into different subdomains, it's just a knee-jerk reaction to put each subdomain in its own view. But the problem with that, and I use the example of, I think it's Home Depot. They weren't a client. I had to pick on someone that wasn't a client. Yeah, so Home Depot's blog is in a different subdomain. And so what I'll frequently see is a view for the blog and then a view for their main site, which is www.homedepot.com. The problem with that is that someone could pretty easily land on the blog and click through to the site. If not, then you have an issue with your site because their blog isn't making the money, their site is. And so in that instance, the puppy, think of the puppy landing on the blog and then going to the site. Well, once they go to the main site, now the data is still being collected, it's just being filtered out. So if you're looking at the blog view, which used to be called a profile in Google Analytics, Google loves to change out the names of their different features. But if you go to the blog view, you'll see that the landing page was whatever page they landed on. Let's just say I landed on this page here, Halloween Style Challenge. But then if I click through to the site, Google will know that I clicked through to another page, but it's going to show up in my content reports as not set. And the converse of that is, let's say I'm looking at the www view, Google's going to know that I landed on a page on the site, but that landing page is going to show up as not set. The reason for that is that everything except for the www subdomain is being filtered out of that particular view. So that's why I'm not a really huge fan of having lots and lots of views. A lot of times sites will divide up their analytics into different views to try to like skirt sampling, that only helps in a very, very limited way. I mean, technically, any site, any reports that you look at, well, let me back up. So sampling is set at the property level, not the view level. So sampling, you're going to start getting sampling at 250,000 sessions. Then you have to move a little slider to the right to say, no, I want all of my data. And then Google will give you 500,000 sessions. And the best way to see how many sessions, and that's not just the number of sessions for a particular view, that's, or a particular report, excuse me, that's overall sessions. So the best way to find that is just to go to audience overview or the acquisition overview report, and you'll see sessions up here in this upper left-hand corner. So obviously I'm nowhere near getting hit with sampling, but some sites will hit sampling in a day. At that point, you should really consider ponying up for Google Analytics. But so sites will try to get around sampling by limiting the amount of data that's coming into their reports. Not very effective. Where it can be effective to have different views is a site like, let me see if I think it's Gucci. So if you go to Gucci site, you'll see, since I'm visiting the site from the US, I'm showing up as /US/EN. But if I come from another country, or I identify myself as coming from another country, I'm not sure, oops, I'm not sure if it'll let me. I used to be able to just pick the country. Let me see what will happen if I just put in .ca. Yes, okay. So if I come in from another country, I'm going to be led to a completely different subdirectory, not even subdomain, subdirectory. So in this case, if I land on the Spanish site, so the site that's designed for Spain, typically I'm not going to say, no, I don't want the Spanish site, I want the Canadian site. So in that case, it would actually be safe to have each of these subdirectories be its own property, not its own view, but its own property. Even a view would work. It's not going to help you with sampling. If you want to have different analytics accounts for the sake of reducing sampling, you want different properties, not views, because views aren't going to help you. But if they didn't have sampling issues, then using different views here would work as well. But that's because typically, with probably pretty rare exception, if I land on this site, I'm going to stay within this subdirectory here. Okay, enough about that. Next question. Do you ever add filters at the account level? And if so, then why? Yes, I do. So I have a few views set up in my account. I only have one property, but I do have filters set at the account level, and I'll show you here. So filtering out my IP, and this is actually the updated version of this one. So this isn't being applied to any views. I can actually delete this. So I have a filter to filter out my IP. Even if I had multiple properties, I would want to filter out my IP. So I would apply that at the account level. So you can have an account. So the account, you generally have one account per organization. But let's say that organization has 3 different websites that they're managing separately. Well, then you would have one account, 3 properties, and then the individual views for each of those properties. So there are some filters that I would want to apply across multiple properties and views. In that case, I would set it up at the account level so that I don't have to keep replicating my work. Also, this host name, I have a host name include file. This helps to get rid of spam. So I just use an include filter, set it at the host name level, and set it to annielytics.com. And then that way I won't get other sites that are, scraping my content and including my Google Analytics tracking code. And it will also rule out quite a few spam sites. So that's a good filter to set up. Now, if you're using AMP, you'll want to make sure you're also including your AMP subdomain. So the best way to see what host names you should include is to go down to Audience, Technology, go to Network, and change the primary dimension to host name. And this is going to show you all of the subdomains that are reporting inside your Google Analytics account. If you see .ru sites and you're not in Russia and you don't have a .ru site, if you see .xyz, like those are typically the types of sites that you'll see. They're spam. And this host name include, I used to have those, but this host name include filter will filter all that junk out. But you want to look, before you create this filter, you want to look to see what host names you have, because there might be a third-party partner site that you're not immediately thinking of that you might look at and say, well, actually, we do want that included in our analytics, and AMP being included in that. Okay, so other filters that I set up, I should have one in here. Lowercase request URIs. Request URIs is just, it's more geek speak for URL. This is just going to force all of your URIs in your content reports to be lowercase. This is going to reduce a lot of duplication in your content reports. And one nice thing about setting it at the account level is that then you can go in here and you can tell Google which views you want to add. So I can add my test and my user ID view. I wouldn't want to apply this to my raw data because I don't want any filters applied to my raw data view. Another good one is to come in and lowercase your search terms. So if you have site search and you're tracking those site search terms, and what I mean by that, so if you go into view settings, first you want to look on your site. If I go to annielytics.com and I do a search, I'll just search for the word test. I look to see, okay, it's using the query parameter S, and then that's what I'm going to drop into my site search. This is just letting Google know what query parameter does your site search use, and then I always strip these query parameters out of the URL, again, to reduce duplication in your content reports. So if you have site search set up on your site, I also recommend forcing those to lowercase, because if someone searches for Excel with a capital E, that on my site, it's going to be a different line item from someone who searches for Excel with a lowercase e. You can also do that for your medium. If you want to lowercase your medium, anything that you want lowercase, I would recommend doing that. I talked about this. This was a test that I ran because I was talking about just how awful, awful, awful this one setting is. It's a view setting and no one should use it. It's here called default page. Don't use it. I created a filter if you want to grab a screenshot of it. I also wrote a blog post about how awful that setting is and why no one should use it, what its original intent was, and a better way to use it for, just search Annie Cushing default page. Okay, all right, next question. How to use customization effectively. So that's a pretty broad brush question, and I wasn't exactly sure what the person was referring to, so I'll just hit on a couple of notes that I wrote for myself. Custom reports are really, really helpful inside Google Analytics. You get to them by clicking on customization, and you'll see all of these custom reports. I do have a blog post on how to create custom reports. I have a video. In fact, it was the first video I ever did, so bear with me. I take you by the hand and walk you through how to create a custom report and the purpose of them. One thing I will say about custom reports is that if you have a site that deals with sampling, you want to be careful with custom reports because custom reports are subject to sampling. So any standard report you use, and if you ever hear the term standard report, that just means all of these reports over here in this left column. But not if you change the primary dimensions. Sometimes if you change the primary dimension, this is what I'm talking about with changing the primary dimension, like what we did earlier. This here is the primary dimension. That just says which dimension do you want to break this report down by, and you can change it. Doesn't give you all the dimensions, but if I change this primary dimension to source medium, it may trigger sampling. Sometimes it doesn't. So, but it seems like the majority of the time, if you change the primary dimension, it will trigger sampling. So that's one thing to be careful about. Any standard report, I could go back 5 years with a site that normally hits sampling every day, and it's not going to get sampled. And that's because that data has already been processed and doesn't have to be reprocessed on the fly. Any data that needs to be reprocessed on the fly is going to get sampling. One other note is that applying a report filter is not going to trigger sampling. So I approach sampling kind of like it's just a ticking time bomb, and I'm just trying not to trigger that time bomb. And so I'll try to manipulate a standard report using all kinds of regex, because you always have this regex filter here. Don't ask me why they call it regex. It's regex. I'll apply all kinds of regex because that's not going to trigger sampling, or at least it never has for me, to try to get exactly what I want and then save that report. Okay, another thing about customization is going back to custom channels. That is the #1 way that I recommend, highly recommend customizing your Google Analytics. That's the main place where you're really going to get the most bang for your buck. So some typical custom channels might be if you're a publisher site and you have syndication agreements with other sites, meaning that you're allowing other sites, let's say you're a smaller publisher and you're allowing Huffington Post and Yahoo Parenting and BuzzFeed to republish your articles to be able to reach a larger audience. You don't want Huffington Post, BuzzFeed, and Yahoo Parenting, which are all behemoths in terms of traffic for a smaller publisher site. You don't want them just showing up in your referrals report. You want that traffic to really stand out. So I recommend creating a partner channel where you would just go into your view settings here, channel settings. You have to have edit access to be able to edit your default channel grouping. But then you would go in here and you would say, okay, I want to create a partner channel and I want it to use source, and I'm going to use regex, and I'm going to say BuzzFeed.com. That's just escaping out the dot because that's also a regex character. That means any one character. And Huffington Post. Oops. .com, HuffPo.com. I think that's their mobile site, et cetera, et cetera. So you would create this, and then anytime you anytime you broker, if that's the word I'm looking for, a new syndication agreement, you want to add them in. And then you just pick a color for them, click done, and then you're going to click save, and Google says to give it about 24 hours for that channel to start to show up. I do share a hack in the channels guide on how to be able to apply these custom channels to historical data. So customizing the default channel grouping will not apply to historical data. There are really important reasons, though, to customize your default channel grouping, and I talk about in that guide why I disagree with Google's advice on it, which their advice is basically For most people, the standard channels will do, but some superstars may want to customize their channels. I flipped that on its hinge and said, for most sites, the default channels will absolutely not suffice. But every once in a while, like basically, if you log into Google Analytics, twice a year, you might not need custom channels. I would still argue that you do. But one other point about customizing these channels is that the order here matters. It's very, very important. So as soon as something renders true, it's going to fall into that bucket. So if I create this partner channel and I put it below referral, well, when someone comes to the site from BuzzFeed or HuffPo, this is going to render true because it's a referral. And it's going to drop into this bucket, and then there won't be any data for your partner channel. So when I create custom channels, I will typically, just to be safe, and you can click and drag by grabbing this little handle here, I move them to the top of the stack. So like, for example, with my Google Docs, I don't want that. If this channel definition was below referral, nothing would fall into my Google Docs channel because that's referral. That's a referral visit, and so it would render true with referral, and I would get nothing. So you want to nudge your custom channels to the top of the stack. Okay, that's all I'll say about that. All right, this is a big one. With cross-domain tracking, if we want to view domain-specific stats, can we use a filtered view, or do we need to track with separate tracking IDs for each domain? An article on Moz seems to indicate that filtered views suffer, and question mark, is it really suffering, from sister site referrals registering as direct visits because of referral exclusions list. What this person is asking, and this is a very, very common issue that I see in analytics audits that I do. So I'm going to try to systematically address this one. So with Universal, Google introduced this fantastic new setting that you get to in tracking info, and this is under property. So if you go to tracking info, you'll see this referral exclusion list. And by default, they went ahead and added your domain to this referral exclusion list. Now, I do see a lot of sites remove their domain because they don't know what this is for. And if you don't know what this is for, this certainly isn't going to help you, that I should be removed. It was clearly written by a developer who doesn't use this for actual business purposes. So you want to have your domain in here because the primary objective of this referral exclusion list is to resolve the issue, well, two issues really. One was self-referrals. So we saw lots of that with Classic and previous versions of Google Analytics where you would go to your referrals report. So you would go to all traffic referrals, and by the way, just a quick mention, this referrals, I'm going to write a blog post about this. You might think that this is the same as this referral channel. It is not. I think that's a mistake, which I'll address in the blog post. But these are actually very different. This referral here is how I personally wish that Google would treat all referrals because it separates out social and non-social referrals. This referrals report here pulls together social and non-social referrals, which I think is kind of an outdated concept. But that said, what you would see before we had this referral exclusion list is my site would show up as one of the top sources. So what Google did was they said, okay, go ahead, at bare minimum, we want your site to be listed here. So that way, if someone leaves my site or something goes amiss, like let's say I'm missing the tracking code on one of my pages. So it looks like the person has left my site, and in previous versions of Google Analytics, it would have registered as a new session when they clicked another page that had my Google Analytics tracking code. Now, with the referral exclusion list, that won't happen because I'm saying if anyone comes from Annielytics.com, regardless of the subdomain, and I don't use different subdomains, but if I did, it would say, go ahead and treat that as direct if they're coming directly from that site, or if they were on Annielytics.com, what appears to be left because maybe there's a page on my site that's missing the Google Analytics tracking code, and then they come back, that cookie will carry over. Now, where it becomes more useful is, let's say you're using a third-party service for an event or for payments such as PayPal. Really not a fan of people leaving your site to pay, but try to tell the airlines that. Or any third-party site. So I use Calendly.com. Now I compromised, and because typically I don't want people to leave my site, I allowed Calendly.com because this is what I use for Hangouts. Like, you can buy a Hangout on my site, you go ahead and pay for it, and then you go to I used to have a page on my site with a widget. I forget the name of the service, but the widget kept breaking. So that really defeated the purpose of having an automated system. So I went ahead with Calendly, but by that point, I already have the e-commerce data. I know the campaign, the landing page, etc., that drove the conversion, the source, you name it. By that point, they've already paid for the Hangout. I feel reasonably confident that when they land on the Calendly page, they're going to go ahead and schedule their Hangout. They would be highly incentivized to do that. So I listed Calendly.com so that if someone comes back, let's say they hit Calendly, they sign up for their Hangout, then they come back to my site for to a thank you page or something, that won't trigger a new session. Same with PayPal, same with if you're using Eventbrite or something like that, where someone's leaving your site, they're going to do something, and then they're coming back. So one thing to be aware of is that if someone comes directly from that site, so let's say, I don't even think PayPal has a blog, but let's suspend reality for a moment and say PayPal has a blog and they linked to my site for some reason. Maybe they liked a resource that I have or whatever. That visit, anyone visiting my site from PayPal, from their blog, is going to show up as direct traffic because I have PayPal listed in my referral exclusion. So I saw this not too long ago in an analytics audit where the client had an article published on Huffington Post. So for some reason, they listed Huffington Post in their referral exclusion. I think mostly because people don't know what the purpose of this is. And so I just let them know I would absolutely take Huffington Post out of this list because you want to know if that Huffington Post article is sending traffic to your site. That's the purpose of the referral exclusion. Now, one thing to keep in mind with referral exclusion is that you don't know what the person is doing on that third-party site. So let's say I'm using a third-party service. Let's say I'm using, I'll just say Eventbrite. If someone comes to my site and that person looks at 3 pages, and then they go to the Eventbrite site, they sign up for the event, they look at 2 more pages, and then they come back to my site and they look at 1 page. So they've looked at 3 pages on my site, 2 pages on the Eventbrite site, and then 1 more page on my site. Google Analytics is going to show only 4 page views for that session because whatever happens on that third-party site, although it won't trigger a new session when the visitor comes back to my site, it's still a black box. If you want to know what the visitor is doing on that other site, and I would contend that you do if the person is converting on that site, you need to be able to do 2 things. And you can write this off for PayPal because even though it's 2016, PayPal still will not let you add any of your code to the page. So you can't add your Google Analytics tracking code, which I find absolutely ridiculous. But you would need to be able to add your code to the site first step, and it needs to be for the same property as your main site, because ultimately you want both of those sites to report as one site, as if that third party site was actually embedded on your site. So first step, add your tracking code. Second step, you need to set up something called cross-domain tracking. And cross-domain tracking is the mechanism that allows the cookie to move back and forth between those two sites as if it's just one site. So where this comes into play with referral exclusion, and I don't know the article that this person was referencing on the Moz site, but if you just have like a bunch of partner sites and you set them up in the referral exclusion list, then that's probably going to be suboptimal unless you want all of them to report as just one site. But typically with partner sites, you want those to report as separate entities or separate properties. The reason for that is you want to know which site is of your partners are driving conversions. If you have blogs on your individual sites, you want to know the content that's driving the conversions and things of that nature. If you set up all your partner sites in your referral exclusion list, everything is just, it's kind of a shit show, because all that traffic, if they come directly, like from one of your partner sites, it's just direct. It's not, you're not getting that referral. And if they go back and forth between the two sites, you're not going to know what they've done on that other site. And so, it becomes that's the only way that I would anticipate that this would become an issue. But again, that's outside the intention of the referral exclusion list. The referral exclusion list is really going back to what I said earlier, to deal with the issue of self-referrals, which it does quite effectively. Now, you will still see some self-referrals for a while, but for the most part, those are going to be returning visitors who have already been cookied. So it can take a little while for those self-referrals to completely die off, depending on how long those cookies are lasting. But you really just mainly want to use this for third-party sites that you're just using kind of as a crutch. You don't want to bring the functionality into your own site. Maybe you don't have the resources to, set up the functionality that you're getting from the third-party site or something like that. But I wouldn't recommend using it for multiple partner sites. Okay, so I think that was all of our questions. Let me double check. Yes, it was. So do we have any questions from the Hangout? I'm going to look in the chat, see if anything was submitted, but you can also just start talking. No one should be muted.
Hello, Annie, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I've got a question. I'm working with an organization as a consultant, and this is something that I've come across a ton with people that have a lot of turnover, and they get Google Analytics accounts set up, and then before you know it, that person that set that account up has disappeared.
Yeah.
I've found a few articles, and the particular question I'm trying to address here is I found a few articles where it says that you can go into Google AdWords as a crutch because Analytics doesn't really provide a very good or any recommendation on how to recover those accounts. But AdWords there is a kind of a process where you can kind of get an AdWords account and get personalized help. Would you recommend that, or is there another way that I just haven't been able to find with working directly with Google Analytics to get those recovered?
Yeah, so this has been an issue from time to time. If you have an AdWords rep, my experience has been you're going to have your account restored faster. Backing things up, it is so important. Like, this whole issue of managing users is really, really important. There are times where I'll go to do an audit and they'll just share like their general password you know, and I tell them, no, 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 don't ever do that. That's how your account
Right.
gets stolen by unscrupulous consultants and stuff. And sometimes consultants will even request the password when really they should just be added as a user, and they should not be given the ability to manage users. So, so it is, yeah, I mean, there is now at least a trash can. So if you can just get access to your Google Analytics account restored, I forget how long Google saves something in this trash can. I think maybe 30 days. So you can get in there and restore it that way, but you still have to go through a Google rep to get that access restored. So to try to prevent that, I always recommend having like a general login where, you know, where that general login has the highest level of access, which is edit, which gives you the other two levels of access, plus manage users. So you can have manage users access without edit access.
Right.
But I recommend setting up both of those and having maybe 2 or 3 people in the organization have access to that. And also being very, very careful who you give edit access to. So this is another issue I've run into. Like when I've done an analytics audit or I'm doing consulting and we're making the changes, even when I've worked in-house, they've given interns edit access. And I'm like, you do realize you are giving interns who you are not paying, who may or may not like your organization, the ability to go in and just wreak havoc.
Right.
So yeah, to answer your question directly, yeah, if they have, I've never heard of the back door. I do know if you have an AdWords rep, you're going to get your data restored much faster. If you don't, then you just have to reach out to Google and ask. But you have to like provide a number of proofs, obviously, that you do own the account.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, any other questions? Doesn't, oh, set up cross-domain tracking. Oh, yeah, one other thing I will say about setting up cross-domain tracking, if you need cross-domain tracking set up and you haven't, well, that's not really an upgrade because it's all free, but you haven't moved to Universal, cross-domain tracking alone will be worth the effort to move your site over to Universal because it is infinitely uh, easier to set up. In Classic, it's a much, much more involved process. If you have Google Tag Manager, then there's also an article. I think Lunametrics did an article on how to set up cross-domain tracking using Google Tag Manager. Google might also have something, I'm not really sure. But then that also is quite a bit easier. I mean, it's really, really simple. With the older versions, you used to have to find every link on your site that linked to the third-party domain and vice versa, all of the links that linked back, as well as forms. So if you fill out a form, like a lead gen form that takes you to your third-party site, you know, like a Salesforce site or something like that, or vice versa, you had to insert these snippets of code onto all of them. And now you just have to add an extra line of code to your Google Analytics tracking code if you're not inside Google Tag Manager or some kind of tag manager solution that allows you to set it up. But it's just an extra line where you tell Google, these are the domains that I essentially want to track as one domain. So much, much, much easier to set up. Okay, with that is 2 o'clock. Thank you for attending. If you have any questions, you can use this page to submit them, and we'll see you next month.